Whenever you're ready, Sean.
Right. Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the first meeting of the Maryland State Board of Education's Transformation and Accountability Committee, and thank the members of the public who've taken an interest in our work and are watching this evening. The purpose of this committee is to support and facilitate the successful implementation of the State Board and Maryland State Department of Education strategic plan, the blueprint for Maryland's future, and provide advice and recommendations on matters related to accountability standards and outcomes. A written description about the committee and the committee meeting dates can be found on the State Board of Education website under the Committees and Task Force section. We will now take a few minutes to introduce ourselves to the public, starting with state board members and then Maryland State Department of Education staff. Staff members, please be so kind as to briefly share your title and how you'll be supporting the work of the committee for today. And I will begin by saying I am Dr. Monica Goldson, Chair of the Education Task Force, Education and Accountability Work Group. And then I will now pass it to our President, Chair of the State Board for an introduction.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Clarence Crawford, and I serve as President of the Maryland State Board of Education.
Thank you. Board Member Chang.
Hi, good evening. My name is Chin Bianca Chen, and I'm a member of the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Chen. Board Member Getty.
Hi, this is Dr. Getty. I'm a member of the State Board.
Thank you. And Board Member Greer.
Hey everyone, Nick Greer, parent board member.
Thank you.
Yep.
We also have Board of Education staff who are assisting this evening, Zach Hands, and thank you, and Elliot Shawn, our general counsel. If now the MSDE staff could also please now introduce themselves. Thank you.
So good evening, this is Chandra Hazlett, Assistant State Superintendent of Assessment, Accountability, and Performance Reporting. I am here this evening to provide an update in regards to end of course assessments.
Thank you. Matthew.
Hi everyone, Matthew Duque, the Director of Research Planning and Program Evaluation at MSDE, and I'm here to share an overview of the strategic plan.
Thank you. Board leadership and the board intend for the majority of the collective board's work related to updates on the implementation of the strategic plan and recommendations on matters related to the blueprint for Maryland's future, accountability standards, and outcomes will be channeled through this committee. This will allow the committee to look deeply at the work prior to our state board meetings and will help us to make informed recommendations to the broader board to drive decision-making and therefore make efficient use of our in-person meeting time. I'll briefly review the protocols and norms for the meeting, and then we will start the meeting. It's my expectation that committee members will read the meeting materials in advance so discussions can be efficient and focused, honoring everyone's time, including our state board members, including our staff members. I'll serve as chair and facilitator, calling on committee members who wish to speak by accessing the raised hand function and utilizing Robert's Rules of Order as a general framework for calling official motions and votes. It will be our norm to continue to respectfully speak our truth and respectfully listen to all members of the committee. We will agree to disagree and do it agreeably. We will now begin the meeting. We will first begin with the Director of Office and Research Planning and Program Evaluation to provide the committee with some of the brief background on the development of the strategic plan and what it has come to next in order to give us some supports for next steps. I think you have a PowerPoint presentation that you also want to post.
I do. It says this sharing is disabled.
Charlene, can you share access with Matt?
Thank you. Once you get access, please feel free to post. Do you have access now?
No, not yet.
If we have the presentation, is it possible for us to post it?
Yes, I think I'm gonna have to do that because I don't know why the setting, I set it to be allowed for anyone to be able to share documents, but it's not allowing that to happen.
Okay.
So let me see if I can share it for you, Matt.
Okay, thank you.
And then just let us know when you need us to change each slide. And while we are waiting for that, I do want to add that one of our additional board members for the committee, General Warner Sumter, is also joining us.
Okay, so I just want to provide a brief overview of the strategic plan. So you can go to the next slide. Go briefly through 4 different parts. So I'll give you a quick introduction to the strategic plan and quickly talk through some of the stakeholder engagement that went into developing the plan. And then the main part is talking through the different elements of the plan and then end up with the next steps. So if you can go to the next slide. So the strategic plan was composed of 3 phases that culminated in presentation of the plan to the board in June of this year. If you can go to the next slide, just briefly, the question is, why do we even need a strategic plan? So there's a couple different factors here. We think about all the effects that the pandemic had on our students, as well as teachers and schools, and that this idea of returning to normal is not good enough. But also just for organizations in general, it's good to have a strategic plan that can align the mission, the vision, the goals, along with the activities that are being implemented and carried out by staff and stakeholders. It's also important, considering the context of the blueprint legislation, how this can be weaved into the fabric of Maryland State Department of Education, as well as the state board. So next slide, please. I mentioned 3 phases of the strategic plan. So the first phase looked at the vision and mission, the values, the priorities and enablers for the plan. Phase 2 focused on the goals and metrics to track the progress for these priorities and enablers, which I'll detail in a few slides. And then phase 3 looks at the targets to be met, as well as, importantly, what are the actual programs and strategies that are going to be implemented in order to achieve these goals. So the next slide is sort of timeline to see that all of this work started back 2 years ago in November of 2021 with some initial engagement of stakeholders and gathering data. Then phase 1, like I said, with the mission, values, vision, priorities, and so forth, was in October of 2022. Phase 2 was February 2023, when we released the metrics and goals that led to phase 3, as I mentioned, in June of this year, with the programs, initiatives, and strategies. And then going forward, we're really talking about how do we actually implement these strategies and initiatives. So next slide, and then you can go to the next slide. So there was a lot of stakeholder engagement in order to develop this plan. So some of the objectives of this engagement were to create a space for stakeholders to give input, to open up these communication lines. So we're flexible and responsive stakeholders. We're also thinking about not getting the same voices over and over, as well as past, so looking for underrepresented and new voices to have some input in the strategic plan, and ultimately to see what matters most to the diverse communities across Maryland for public education. Some of the stakeholder groups in the next slide that we reached out to, of course, students and families, educators in the schools, as well as the districts, community organizations, advocates and experts, the business community, and our partners in higher ed. The next slide shows some of the counts, these outreach. So we counted over 40,000 connections made. That includes stakeholder survey for the strategic plan. That got almost 30,000 responses, as well as roundtables that were held, listening sessions, different events, and data walks in each region of the state, as well as most recently these charrettes on the strategic plan. So what is the strategic plan? So the next slide, we start to talk about the elements of the strategic plan. So first, next slide shows the mission and vision. So I won't read through these, but they're there talking about a rigorous and world-class education for every Maryland student. And then the next slide, some of the values that were identified are accountability, engagement, equity, excellence, and transformation. Next slide, please. So some of the main anchors of the strategic plan are these 4 priorities. And based on stakeholder feedback, they trace the path of students, starting with their first schooling experience up to when they leave the public system. So the 4 priorities are that students are ready for kindergarten. Number 2, they're ready to read by the end of 3rd grade. Number 3, they're ready for high school. And number 4, they're ready for college and career. Next slide, please. Now, along with these 4 priorities, we also have 4 we're calling enablers. And the way to think about these are what are the conditions or supports that need to be provided in order to see that students are successful and that our schools are successful. So the first one is that Maryland is supporting schools, families with high quality data and reporting, as well as some supports for educators around professional development and using resources as well as the assessments as much as possible in the most effective way. Second enabler is that schools be equipped with high quality curricula, lessons, assessments, and systems for both intervention and acceleration. The third enabler is around teaching. So elevating the stature of teaching 3 different ways. One is around a highly qualified and diverse workforce, and that's through recruitment as well as retention. The second part is the rigorous standards for educator prep programs, as well as induction programs for new teachers. And thirdly is the career ladder system that is part of the blueprint, which provides not only development, but also growth opportunities for all teachers and educators. The last enabler is to ensure student success around social emotional learning, safety, school culture and climate, wraparound supports and partnerships, as well as family and community engagement. So next slide, we look at, thank you. I mentioned for each priority, we have a goal. So priority 1, remember, was for ready for kindergarten. So for that priority, the goal is to increase the percentage of kindergarten students scoring at the level of demonstrating readiness on the KRA. Priority 2's goal is increase percentage of grade 3 students that are proficient or above on grade 3 English language assessment. Priority 3 is the decrease in percentage of grade 8 students that met 1 or more of what we call the ABC indicators. So this is like early warning system where students are identified as at risk of having trouble in high school based on these 3 factors. ABC are attendance, behavior, and their coursework. Then priority 4, we're looking for an increase in percentage of high school graduates who not only met the state CCR standard, but also completed a CCR pathway. If you go to the next slide, we also have goals for each enabler. So remember, enabler 1 is around providing high quality data and reporting. So it's a little more vague and we can't capture it with a number or percentage. Enabler 2, we're looking at to increase the percentage of schools visited by the expert review teams, where they find that they have integrated multi-tiered system of supports and curriculum instruction is highly rated. Enabler 3's goal is to increase the percentage of new teachers of color, as well as the retention rate over a 3-year period, and also the percentage of teachers eligible for the teacher leadership track on the career ladder. Lastly, Enabler 4, the goal is to increase the percentage of schools that are scoring favorable in their learning environment, as well as looking for a decrease in the suspension rate. Now, these goals are statewide, but we also disaggregate them by LEA, as well as by student group, so including race, ethnicity, English learners, students with disabilities, and economically disadvantaged students. Now, the last part I mentioned for phase 3 is what are the actual strategies, programs, and initiatives that will be implemented for the strategic plan. So again, I won't read through every one here for the sake of time, but priority 1, ready for kindergarten. We're looking at increasing access to early childhood programs using a mixed delivery system that combines both private and public providers. Also expanding Judy and Patty centers, developing early learning standards, and using the comprehensive early childhood assessment system to make sure students are ready for kindergarten. Next slide, please. We're ready to read, really focused on the science of reading, training and coaching teachers on the science of reading, as well as making sure we have high quality instructional materials aligned to the science of reading. Next slide, please. Ready for high school, there are several strategies. One, the major strategy is the early warning system. I mentioned the ABC system. There are 3 components to that. One is actually having the data and be able to identify who the students are that are at risk, but also having a response system and tracking these interventions and how students are responding to them. Next slide, please. So for priority 4, ready for college and career, we have setting a new CCR standard. We have high quality instructional materials again, and again, an early warning system, specifically for making sure students are on track for CCR, as well as looking at high quality school day tutoring to provide support for students. If we can, thank you. So Enabler 1, the strategies are professional learning series, as well as a new statewide finance and data system, and some accountability tools to provide for the LEAs in schools with actionable data. Next slide, please. Enabler 2, around high quality curricula and systems for intervention. I mentioned some of the early warning systems, but here's where it comes together. So there are multiple points along the student's path where we can identify early before that they are at risk of different points. So we mentioned not being ready for kindergarten and then ready to read by the end of 3rd grade, but we also identified not being proficient in math by the end of 5th grade, mentioned not being ready for high school, as well as not being on track to graduate from high school in 4 years. So there are multiple points in the student's academic career. Next slide, please. So Enabler 3, in terms of elevating the teacher profession, look at strengthening regulations around educator prep programs, as well as the teacher induction program, supporting Grow Your Own Staff programs, which is already happening through Maryland Leads, and then also focusing on implementing the teacher and leader career ladder. Next slide, please. So Enabler 4, in supporting students socially and emotionally, focus on community schools and providing professional learning to for those wraparound services from the community, but also focusing on mental health promotion, including the mental health response program, which is currently being implemented, as well as using the Maryland School Survey as actionable data on its links and importance for student achievement and attendance. So next slide. And then next slide, please. So what's next for it? So you'll notice there's an asterisk for phase 3. While we have the goals, we are currently working on establishing the baselines for each goal and working out some projections, 3-year projections for each of the goals and setting targets for these. And then of course, we've already started implementing some of these initiatives, as I mentioned, but there are many that still are not fully implemented or need some more work. So that's some of the work going forward. I believe that's the last slide. Yes. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any questions? All right, I will start. My first question was, thank you for first, I want to commend the staff for the outreach that you did for the strategic plan. And I appreciate you providing a summary again of what's in the strategic plan, just in case there are members of, just in case they're members of the community who have not had the opportunity to read the document, which they can see it in its entirety by accessing our website. But I did have a question around the baseline data that you all are working to establish for the enablers. So how long do you think it'll take to establish the metrics for that baseline data? As I was under the assumption that this year would be the year that we will begin to look at that baseline and start to map out the metrics over the next few years.
That's correct. And we have the baseline data for pretty much everything that we can. There's 1 or 2 measures where the collection hasn't started, so those are unique. But so we have the baseline data. We're working on or laying out different possible projection. There's different ways to project it based on historical trends, and with the pandemic specifically, we sort of have a pre-pandemic trend, and now we have a start of a post-pandemic trend. So we want to offer a few options, but I think that's in the very near future.
Got it. So that baseline data will be posted in a metric for everyone to be able to see, correct?
Yes, that's the thinking. So
Okay.
once we establish these projections, they'll be made public, and we'll track them every year possible.
Perfect. And then I have one more question before I'm sure my colleagues begin to weigh in. Do you all have an established communication plan for implementation to make sure that every division sees themselves in the implementation of it and every local education agency?
Good question. Yes, so we're sort of in the midst of the internal part. So our staff have been participating in internal charrettes like we did with the communities. So the staff are learning about the strategic plan and engaging with it and sharing their roles in each priority. I can't quite speak to the external part. We should have someone from communications here, but I can get back to you on that.
Okay. Yep. No problem. I appreciate it. I don't want to hog up the time by asking all the questions. So do my colleagues have any questions? Mr. Duque? Yes, President Crawford.
I think it's the staff did an excellent job, and it positions us well for success. So that's what I wanted to just say, was that very nicely done. The outreach has been outstanding, and I think it's been very well received. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, President Crawford. Anyone else have any questions? Chen, I think Chen, yes.
Yes, thank you, Matthew, for giving us that overview. I just have one question. You mentioned that once we establish the baseline data and move forward, we'll monitor the data collection annually, means every year. Is it possible to have a shorter period, like a quarterly or biannually, like twice a year? And then we can make the data more useful and more powerful for LEAs.
I wish there was. Unfortunately, I think most of this data is just annual data. I think a lot of it is assessment data. So it's the state assessments given once a year. The survey is given once a year. Certainly where there's opportunity, we would, but I think pretty much all of it, the data are once a year collections.
Is it because of the time that you had to invest to perform the survey or data, or is every LEAs on certain kind of data feeding system? So once they send the data there or just recorded those data in one repository system, and then it'll kind of come to the MSDE.
I think it's a combination of those two. So depending on what the data are, it's one or the other.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question, Board Member Chin Chin. Anyone else have any questions? I have one more, and before we conclude this session, just I know that you're doing now the internal component piece around making sure that all of the Maryland State Department of Ed staff members are aware of every component and piece of the strategic plan. As we move forward in this committee, we'll be getting updates on a monthly basis on where we are with implementation. Can we also get a number of how many staff members have participated in those internal sessions around strategic plan? Because we do want to make sure that in order for the plan to move forward, everyone has to live, breathe, and see themselves in it. So just want to make sure that they are participating.
Certainly.
Yep, thank you. All right, that was called Teacher Wait Time. I want to thank you, Mr. Duque. Oh, wait a minute. I think Board Member Chin Chin has one more question.
Yeah, I'm so sorry that, I have one little question about, I know the plan for MSD to explore, kind of deploy all the kind of expert team to selected schools. I'm wondering how you can kind of collaborate the effort by bringing back data, so we can have a good baseline compared to the actual action got carried out in each school that the expert team visited.
Yeah, so we are using expert review team data they're bringing back to track enabler 2 around curricula, because there's no great way to know what schools are using and actually implementing, but having the expert review teams go into the schools is the best way. So we are planning to use that data to track the implementation of enabler 3 or 2,
Okay.
sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, but regarding Peter 1, I do want to bring up to your attention. I know the kindergarten, the registration or enrollment start at age 5, right? And by September 30th, that's the age cutoff. Yeah, I'm wondering some like kind of babies or student born in October, November, and December, they could be ready because they went through the daycare, things like that. I know currently some LEAs are making selections or get some one-on-one assessment with those students. And I'd like to see how often some of those students have been identified that are kindergarten ready while their age has not met 5 years old.
I can see if we can look into that. Certainly there are different factors that go into the readiness of kindergartners.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we conclude this portion of the agenda, I do want to remind the staff, MSDE staff, that once you have drafted those targets and have the baseline data and drafted those targets, we would expect that those targets will be brought to this committee for review so that we can share them with the entire board prior to implementation. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
And if you need any assistance, just let us know. Thank you. Before we thank you again, if there are no questions, we'll move to the next agenda item. All right, perfect. Before we move on, I do want to acknowledge that board member Sean Bartley has also joined us. He was there for the previous presentation, but we didn't want to interrupt. So thank you, Sean. All right. About 2 weeks ago, we presented the staff 6 questions that we needed additional information and clarification around the end of the course requirements. And we have now asked on the call tonight is Chandra Hazlett, the Assistant State Superintendent, to briefly review her memo to the committee on the 6 questions that we presented regarding implementation of the end of the course requirements. And then, of course, we will open up for any additional questions. So first, I want to thank you for quickly responding to the questions and being prepared to kind of give a verbal overview tonight of a summary of those questions. And then if there's still additional questions, we'll ask them then. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and happy to be here to talk to the questions. So I thought it might be helpful to just provide a little bit of a background on end-of-course assessments before I go into the questions. So this end-of-course implementation started pre-pandemic with the graduation task force in 2018. Folks that have been in Maryland for a while probably remember that students used to have to earn a passing score on one of the 4 assessments, English language arts, mathematics, government, and science in order to graduate. The graduation task force made 2 recommendations. One is to no longer require that passing score. Students would still need to take the tests, but then also to add the requirement that the score or result from the assessment would be included as 20% of the student's course final grade. So those were the recommendations. They were presented to the state board, and they were voted in to begin in school year 22-23. As we all know, we were faced with a pandemic. And so soon after the pandemic or during it, when we were virtual, LEAs basically asked for additional time to make sure that the implementation was successful, which was granted. So that's where we find ourselves today. Just last July, the state board basically made a couple of changes. One is that the requirement would begin in the 23-24 school year. And they also kept it to just science and government, with English language arts and mathematics being removed, primarily because of the blueprint requirements. So that was another piece of the conversation that just transpired this past July. So some of the questions that you received were around what engagements and communications had been provided to LEAs. And I just want to state that that delay that was granted in 22 provided a really rich opportunity to engage with our LEAs at all levels. So we worked with local accountability coordinators in regards to technical aspects of the implementation. We worked with assistant superintendents for each of the LEAs. We worked with content supervisors in particular, and we also worked with technical staff within each of the LEAs. So those are the noteworthy ones, but we also were ready to work with guidance counselors and other opportunities to provide information as it came up over the course of the 22-23 school year in particular. A couple of things I wanted to call out in regards to things that we did to support a successful implementation is we actually were able to have a pilot where we actually reached out to about 8 LEAs and worked with them in regards to the transfer of data to make sure that when we were to implement the end of course assessment process, we were able to take the results and provide it to the local school systems so that they would be able to import it into the grading systems. That was a big concern in 2022. They weren't sure if they were technically going to be able to support the requirement. So given that extra year, we were able to actually work through the technical aspects of how that information would be put into grading systems. And so we're happy to say that pretty much every system across the state was supported through that pilot program. So we were able to have technical solutions for all 24 LEAs. The other aspect of the engagement with the local school systems was working through frequently asked questions. So as they were going through, what is it going to take to implement this, this EOC, questions came up and they were channeled to us from the accountability coordinators, from guidance counselors, content supervisors, as well as assistant superintendents. And so we met monthly with assistant superintendents. We hashed out or we worked through responses to questions that they may have, and then we incorporated those into a frequently asked questions document. The latest one was just released last September with the LEAs having advanced review of that information as well. We have had ongoing technical assistance, and even now we have monthly technical assistance sessions scheduled throughout this academic school years to make sure that everybody has it on their calendars when we can be reached to answer any questions. But obviously we are available and we are reaching out and working with our LEAs on an ongoing basis. But this way there are office hours set up every month throughout this academic year. We've also had dedicated training for staff so that folks know how to incorporate the data on their end in regards to putting them in grading programs, so that that whole process can be very seamless. There's some training in regards to how to read the reporting system, because we've enhanced some of the reporting systems as well to support this work. Those are a call out to some of the specific engagements. There are obviously a number of other ones that we have done, but I just wanted to highlight those. Some of the other questions were around the OC test itself and whether or not there is additional burden to LEA staff, and if we have staff here to support the work. I did want to highlight that the test itself hasn't really changed in regards to we have a vendor that we work with to develop the assessment as well as to administer the assessment and to score the assessment. That is still in place. So even, for example, in 2018, we had a government assessment, we had a science assessment. It was scored by the vendor. The results were provided to the local school system, and then they were presented publicly as well. Folks recognize the performance levels of those assessments. The only real change right now is that it's the same type of assessment. We work with our vendor to development. They assist us with administering it. The vendor scores the assessment. The change really is in how the results are prepared and sent back to the local school systems. So the additional change is that not only is there a performance level, but we now have translated that result to a grade, A, B, C, D, for example, and we've also provided a score, for example, an 87 or a 73. So that test result has now been translated into a grade and a score that can be put into a local school system's grading program and used however they have a grading program. And so I just wanted to emphasize that some local school system wanted the grade to use, and some of the local school systems wanted the actual score result, like an 87. So we are able to provide both to the LEAs, and that provides flexibilities for our LEAs as well. And so another question in regards to how that information has been transferred to the local school systems. So we've obviously worked very closely with our research office and our psychometricians with that work. We've been able to use real data with the delay. So we were able to use real data and look at impact data in regards to how our students would do on the assessment. We've provided over the past month the ranges to our local school systems. So we've provided to that superintendents at a very high level and content supervisors and local accountability coordinators those ranges for if what they needed to earn on a test for it to be an A or a B or C, for example. And we are just this week sending out the very detailed lookup table for our technical folks in the system so that they also have that as well. So we are, as we are getting the information, trying to share that, provide office hours and training and information in regards to what all the information means as well. One of the questions was in regards to timelines for when the scores are going to be returned to the districts. Historically, it's always been a challenge to get our assessments and score them and return the results to the school systems and the students. It's a very rigorous process in regards to scoring, but we have over the past year really worked closely with our vendor to actually reduce that time to 9 days. And that's one of the fastest turnarounds for a test such as ours in the nation. So we've done a lot of work with our vendors. We are implementing something called basically on-demand scoring. So as the results come in, we're going to have enough staff available, or a vendor has been able to put in place enough staff on their end. And systems, because it's not just staff that is scoring, it's also systems that are scoring those assessments, that they're in place to rapidly turn those results around. We are working right now actually with our local education agencies as well as our vendors to, as folks are registering for assessments in the fall block, because we have 2 blocks, to make sure that that alignment with the demand and the ability to turn those scores around is in place for this fall assessment block. So we're going through that process right now just to make sure that we have the exact count of students that are taking the assessment and when they would be taking the assessment. So we are prioritizing that work. It's very important to us that we continue that ability to turn those results around very quickly. And then there was a final question that was asked in regards to what impact is this having on courses in regards to students being able to signing up for courses based on this requirement for the test to be 20% of the grade. And to be completely honest, it's something on our radar, but it's just too early to really know how that the student registering of courses may be impacted by this new policy shift away from a requirement to pass a test to the requirement to have it count for their course grade. But it is something that we will be monitoring over the coming year. And I think I've hit on all the questions, but I'm sure folks here on the call will let me know if I've missed something, and I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much for that detailed summary and for responding to the questions.
Sure.
Just so that our public knows, those questions have been posted on our website, and you can access the questions as well as the responses for further review. Are there any questions? And I think President Crawford unmuted himself. No, you're fine. All right. Board Member Greer.
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Hazlett, thank you to you and your team for doing a report out on this. It's really helpful. For everyone else, I'm very sorry that I can't be on camera right now. I just got off a plane and I'm heading back into Baltimore. Anyway, so one of the questions that I have is, I wonder, can you help us understand what one of the key threats would be to that turnaround time increasing from 9 days? Like, I hear that we have the fastest turnaround, but what would actually threaten that in this upcoming first round, and even maybe the next round in the window, I guess, in May or June?
Sure. I can. A couple of challenges is that we need to make sure that we have accurate numbers. So one of the challenges we're having right now is that we predicted around 10 to 15,000 students would be taking it in the fall block, and we have seen an uptick in that number for this fall block. So we need to make sure that if in fact we're going to have, say, 20,000 students taking the test, that we actually have enough scores and systems in place to support that new growing assessment counts, basically. And then the other one is just making sure that that if there are peaks, that we can support the peaks as well. So what we're finding is that folks are choosing, LEAs are choosing, and it's justifiable that they're choosing to assess their students later in the assessment window so they can have enough instructional time for the material. We just need to make sure that we balance that out with an opportunity to have a makeup test as well. So just making sure that we can control for those peaks of assessments so that we have enough of the scores in place to support the fast turnaround. Those are the 2 primary risks.
Got it. Thank you. And then if I can just check another thing, when when it comes to like I completely understand that you don't have the data yet to understand the trends for enrollment. At this point, I appreciate and would love to hear as you see kind of things happening. I have a hypothesis here, but I'm not totally certain that it's true and would love to understand a little bit more. So I wonder also what, like, it sounds like the technical assistance that you all have done has been really good. And it sounds like you've been giving some support to LEAs so far. Can you help me understand, was there any technical assistance provided to LEAs regarding sort of, I'll call it parent empowerment or caregiver empowerment? Like, what does this really mean for their children and how to support the conversation around that when this is potentially, like, we all have experienced it as not something new, but it's potentially new to parents if it hasn't been communicated in advance from LEAs over the 22-23 school year as the change was coming.
So thank you for the question. It is definitely something that's been on our radar, particularly recently, as we know we're entering this academic year. A couple of things that we've tried to do over the past year is do peer-to-peer, so LEAs working with LEAs. So we've had opportunities for the LEAs as part of our monthly updates with them to work with each other on what communication strategies are working well for you and what and here's our challenges, how can others provide any support around that area. But in regards to direct MSDE to the public, that is something that we have approached communications to provide support on. So I'm not necessarily able to speak to that further.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for what we're doing directly to the public. I was just thinking about what has been provided to LEAs to support them. And I see some of the parent resource guides coming out recently and like those and would love to understand ways that we can sort of leverage some of those tools and support some of the LEAs to do a little bit more of that work so that parents know about this at least before the next testing window.
Thank you for the suggestion. I'll take a look at it and follow up with our comms folks.
Thank you, Board Member Greer. Are there any other questions? All right, I did just want to add one before we adjourn this topic. Not a question, just a clarification. The turnaround of 9 days, 9 working days, or 9 calendar days?
Good clarification. I'm almost positive it's 9 working days.
I'm sure it is too. I just want to make sure everyone knows it's working days.
Yes.
And then the next one is just for people to be cognizant that as much as LEAs want to go towards the end of the testing window, so that their students have a longer experience with the content, they also need to be cognizant that then they're also pushing up against the end of the quarter, potentially date that their quarter ends, and they've got to still take into account that it's 9 working days that you get the results back, and then still provide enough time for staff to input those grades into the grading system before that quarter is over. So just want to make a note of that. And then speaking on the inputting piece, just want to make sure that when they get either the numerical or the letter grade back, it is the expectation that the LEA teacher, someone has to input that into the grading system, correct?
Most LEAs, it will be an automatic process at this point.
Okay,
so
perfect.
Yes. Yeah. It's not a manual process.
So when you say most, does it mean it has to, our system will export when we send the scores over, the data can now be exported from an Excel file into their platform, no matter what platform they use?
Correct. And that was the point of the pilot, was to provide that procedures and mechanisms for all of the grading programs out there to have an automatic process. Or sometimes there's a couple that may have a workaround for this year, but in the future, I'll be automatic. Yes.
Perfect. So thank you for reducing the work for an educator. All right. Are there any other questions? All right. Well, we want to thank you for giving us a summary for tonight for the end of the course assessment, allowing us to ask some additional questions and to clarify for the public. We so appreciate it. It is a miracle. It is 6:50. We will be able to adjourn early this evening. Before we do adjourn, though, I do want to remind the public that we will have a public hearing on this Thursday for our college and career ready options. And that meeting will start at 5:30. I wonder if
4:30.
4:30. That meeting will start at 4:30. So we hope that people will tune in, participate, speak their voice. We are hoping to hear which of the two options people are interested in, so that as board members, we can then determine next steps. I thank you all for listening, and I make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All right, it's gonna be so moved. Clearly, I don't think
It's like,
anyone
yeah,
is gonna
second,
disagree
yeah.
with it. Thank
No.
you. All right,
Thanks for the meeting, y'all.
Thank you all, and thank you to our Maryland State Department of Ed staff. We truly appreciate you.